All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the new directors workshop. My hope is that we can get a recording of this, so then any of these thoughts that directors have about really what this transition is into a leadership role, the things that come with it, can be immortalized for all time to come. So future new directors can use it as maybe a rubric for what to do, what not to do, as they kind of transition into their role. So with us, we've got some, I would say, great directors that have really made things work with their team. And I like that these teams are really structured in multiple different ways. So I think we can get a lot of feedback for whatever university situation that you are in. We might have some more people pop in. I'm not positive. So I will introduce them as they come. So we have Aaron Kall from Michigan, John Turner from Dartmouth, Glen Frappier from Gonzaga, Vik Keenan from the new school, and everyone else is here to learn. So with that in mind, I was just going to have people talk about whatever you think you have expertise on. The things that I know that the people who filled out the survey had said that they were interested in hearing about were the quote, administrative confusion of running a team. So anything along those lines. Recruitment tactics that you have, selling your program to the university, and just kind of everyday squad management tactics. So if you can think of things that don't fit in that, that is perfectly fine. But we just want to hear from you, maybe things that you did that have worked, things that you tried that did not, and really using this as a frame for when our newer leaders joining debate kind of step into their roles. So I'm going to have us go in alphabetical order from last name. So let me make sure that I know the alphabet correctly. That would mean that Glen, you are our starting point person.
Oh my gosh, just putting me on the spot like that. That's excuse me. I feel like the kid in my class that I call, you cold call to give their speech first. Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for putting this together. I can't tell you how incredibly valuable something like this would have been when I first became a director, because I really kind of felt like I got dropped in the deep end. At least my first position after being a graduate student. Was director, and so I was much younger then, and yeah, in the deep end is probably the best way to describe it. I think the categories that you kind of suggested earlier are really good guides for some of these discussions, because these are a lot of things that I really didn't have a lot of experience with, and so I'm giving just a brief overview here. Obviously, I can speak to more of this stuff later. One of the things that I guess I'll just kind of throw out there. I think one of the greatest things I did when I was a young director was seek help from older directors. And so, not being afraid to kind of go talk to the folks that have been around quite a while. And so, I remember being in my first few years at Gonzaga and facing some tough, difficult questions that I didn't know kind of how to deal with, or how to do something. And some of the folks I would lean on were Scott Dethridge and Carla Leeper and Ken Strange, kind of the folks who had been around a while. So I think kind of early on, I learned that I probably need to check a little bit of the hubris at the door, and really seek out some advice from people who knew what they were talking about. And so that said, I see where this is going to be valuable, and I'm glad you were able to put this together. And I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more. But I got to say, in answer to a lot of these kind of areas that people are asking about, whether that's recruitment or selling program to the university, even down to kind of day-to-day squad management tactics, I got to say that a vibrant alumni network that is active can be a game changer for a lot of programs. And so I'm sure I know some other folks who are directors here have really mastered that. And I'm kind of also learning from them as well. But I found that that's one area that can really accomplish a lot of the goals that you set for yourself as a young director. And so, again, speak to that more. But I can't understate the importance of understanding that you're joining an organization that existed long before you were on the scene, and that really has a lot to offer you as you kind of continue to build towards long-term sustainability of your program. So I'll just kind of shut it down there for now and let someone else talk. But that's maybe a little bit of a view from 10,000 feet for me.
Thanks, Glenn. So next we would have Aaron Kall from Michigan.
Hello. Yes, I definitely want to echo one thing that Glenn mentioned was kind of talking with former directors, and not just, kind of nationally, the most prominent ones, but I wanted to first, when I kind of took over in 2010, was talk to a lot of the past directors at Michigan, going back to the 1960s. Debates kind of gone around a bunch of different places. Used to be in the communication department before being a student group, and now recently in student life. And so kind of the first thing I did was find the old comm professor, Bill Colburn, who was the director back to the 1960s, and he had invaluable insights, both from the university, and also great connections to several of the alums that debated back into the 1960s and 1970s, and even some of the more recent directors through the 1980s and 90s. And they were great about trying to identify a lot of the debaters from the program. I think the most important thing you can do when you start out is learn about the history of your own program, kind of where it was, how long it's been around, and the kind of the connections to as many different people as possible. When I started researching it, I learned that debate at Michigan went back to 1903, was one of the longest serving and longest standing extracurricular programs. And one of the things you mentioned was kind of selling it to the university, and that was something I found immediately, that university really resonated with administrators, just the length and longevity of the program, and kind of how long it's been around with some of the old sports programs of fraternities and sororities. And so that's something, just the history. And when you think to a lot of the big programs and big tournaments, how long that they've been around, I think that was really important. And kind of the next, I think most important thing is when finding about the history of the program, is identifying, in addition to coaches, just all the alums that you can, because that's really important. I looked through every NDT booklet that I could, and I know I got a lot of help at Kentucky, because they had a big archive of them, and obviously the Wake Forest webpage, and to try to identify everyone that had debated at Michigan. And then that's one thing, is kind of identify the alums, but then it's all about finding them, and that's gotten a lot easier with Google and LinkedIn and things like that. And so kind of once I got the names, I was able to find out kind of what they were doing now and what their contact information was. So I could, put together the listserv, which is one of the most important things I did, was try to identify several hundred debate alums and coaches, and kind of so I could communicate kind of what the vision with the program was, what were happening. And that was really helpful. And, once you identify a good majority of those alums throughout the years of the history of the program, those alums will help you kind of find maybe some people that fell through the cracks, or that you weren't easy to identify. Say, hey, when you were on the team in this era, what were some of the other kind of names and friends and teammates that you had? And then they'll give you leads. And when you talk to several people like that, then that'll make it really easy to very quickly accumulate a really large list. And so try to track down as many debaters and coaches as I could, put together a listserv, and then kind of begin that communication. And that also is really helpful with the administration, kind of the more people that the program served, the more prominent the positions that are in now. That's something that can be really helpful. And then also kind of, every school is different in terms of what you can do in terms of development and fundraising, but getting development involved, because obviously they're always looking for angles like that, and different capital campaigns are occurring. And so kind of once you do that legwork, then it's a lot more likely to get the assistance of them. And so I think I'll kind of end it there. But kind of when I did take over about 13 years ago, those were some of the very first steps that I took, and have really paid dividends over the years. I would encourage anyone just kind of starting out to definitely do that at the very beginning.
Thanks, Aaron. I think, as a new director myself, the comment that you were making about creating the alumni pool based on like word of mouth was something I really had to do. And something that I actually found with development offices, at least at Mason, I don't know if this would be corollary for everywhere else, is that I was able to get like student info from tab room. So like the past decade and change. And when I went to the development office with that information, I was like, I have all the new people, but we don't know any of the old people. They were like, we'll do it because that could be a donor. So they ultimately did like a ton of that legwork as long as I was willing to give them like the last decade. So,
Yeah.
but
Tab room's been a total game changer with that, and so much easier to do it because all your students are logged in there. But what we do every year, the development says just send us a list of the people on your team with their UMID ID numbers, and so kind of they can have them, and we just do it at the beginning every year. So so they'll have them forever. But yes, thank you to Chris Palmer and Tab Room. That's made the tracking down much easier than looking at old scanned NDT books from decades ago.
definitely true. All right. Thank you so much. Vik, you are next.
As much as I love looking at an old scanned NDT book, everyone knows that, because otherwise you can't argue with people at the NDT committee meeting. There's a little bit different of a situation if you're at a new or re-emerging program where maybe you don't have that alumni base, maybe you don't have that former director support, maybe you're starting things from scratch or you're restarting things. And so the history and legacy that your school had may not quite have the same through line to you. And I think one of the things that I've learned is that you have to build your network of the current coaches in our community. Look, you can't complain to your own students about some of the stuff that we end up doing. There is just like our job is to kind of ease their, anxiety, stress, kind of that becomes part of our job as directors and coaches. So finding people that they don't have to be your best friend. They can just be someone you respect as a colleague in this community that you can ask and just be like, hey, is it okay if I ask you questions? My running joke is that I am the emergency emotional support animal for a few directors. Like something is going wrong, I get a weird text message. That's fine. If anybody here wants to send me a weird messenger, text message, Google chat, whatever format of message that is. But having the people that you can be like, hey, is it me? Or is this weird? One of the best examples is also that as directors, if we set examples for each other. So like Neil Birch at West Virginia, like set such a great example for me of, as someone who was an experienced director, even just checking in with someone who wasn't in his program about hypothetical scenarios and going, is this just me or am I overreacting or what's my litmus test? The other thing that I think is really, really important is understanding the debate program you have at your institution, at your school, basically, because not every institution can support the same kind of debate team. And that means that the institution you're at, even if it does have a history and it does have a legacy, may not continue to have the same legacy or the same resources or the same functionality. So our ability to pivot and adapt and address the program in front of us is what's really important, because that's what lets you pitch to your administration and be able to talk and recruit students who are within the means that you have. So those are kind of the important pieces of whether or not you're fighting uphill as a director or you're working with the program that you have in front of you, I think. And I think that kind of reconciles you to sort of either the limits or the opportunities. And that's the other thing, is that just because things have been done a certain way in the past doesn't mean that it has to continue that way. If you can figure out new and innovative solutions, either with other schools, with yourself, just kind of figuring out where things are. So it's okay to not quite do everything the way that it's been done before. And obviously, once you get an awesome cat that joins into Zoom events, because Turner's cat has been the highlight of my Zoom experience while we've had district meetings. And I look forward to him joining us this Sunday or whenever we have our district meeting. But other things that bring you joy or happiness, because this activity, we're here because we love it. And at the point where sometimes it's hard and it's difficult, you have to find the things that remind you why you love it, why you're doing this as a director, why you're coaching, why you have the sick student going to the hospital at 2 a.m. or whatever. Oh no, that's just Jackie. So, but we're here for you.
Thank you so much, Vik. One thing you said I think is honestly like resonated with me was the know the program you're at. I just spoke with a couple of our donors because they wanted to talk to the new person. And I thought it was a really good strategy to tell them how well our varsity teams had done at national tournaments. I'm like, everybody wants to know about this. These were all former NDT debaters. So I'm like, oh yeah, our varsity team cleared at this tournament. And one of them interrupted me and said, we don't care at all how your varsity teams are doing. He was like, all we want to know is how your novices are doing. And that like threw me for a loop because I will always brag about our novices, but I just assumed like these are NDT, like former competitors. They're going to want to hear about how varsity is. They were like, no, don't speak to us about this at all. Like, we want to know about the butts in the seats. And that was like kind of eye-opening for me when it came to how to sell the program you got, I guess. So I think that was a really good point. All right. So next we've got John.
Cool. So I'll try and go down on a couple of the themes that were raised initially. First, kind of transitioning to an administrative role. This was something that I found pretty daunting. Not having been the person who was in charge of logistics really at all up until that point in my career. And I think the kind of most important thing there is to try and establish some routines for yourself for the set of tasks that you have to do that you probably haven't done a lot before. So like registering for the tournament, you know, like determining with the teams what the travel schedule looks like, registering for the tournament, booking travel in whatever form is appropriate, the hotel, right? Kind of the sequence of stuff that, you know, you probably have implicitly a version of that as either an assistant, a graduate student, or a debater. The set of tasks looks different, and habituating yourself to doing them is likely the only way to make sure that stuff doesn't just totally slip through the cracks. I remember I was so proud of myself for one of the early tournaments that it's like I'd gotten all the plane stuff done. I'd have hotel rooms, etc. And then like, I don't know, 5 days before Kentucky or something was like, oh, right, I haven't registered for the tournament. Like there was a chance that we were just going to show up to a major, like, hey, we've got our, isn't it so great that I like actually managed to get everybody on a plane? And then, you know, no one actually knows that we're going to attend the tournament. So kind of creating that list for yourself and like treat it as a simple, you know, like here's my checklist that I know that I'm going to need to do every time. Probably there are some days or times that you can or should assign to yourself to regularize that a little bit. Otherwise, it's going to probably feel like a little bit of a scramble no matter what, but it can feel like a real scramble if you have not instituted some ways of keeping track of what got done for which tournament. It can be very surprising how quickly as you progress through the schedule, like, oh, I just got back from this tournament. I forgot, or, you know, didn't really plan that. In fact, I should have already booked the flights for, you know, the next tournament before I got back and, you know, tried to rest up for a half day or whatever. The administrative stuff doesn't go away. I know that for especially the first couple of years that I was directing, having had a lot of experience as an assistant coach and graduate assistant where I was very research and strategy focused, I kept thinking and in some ways interacting with the students as like, oh, there are these parts of my job that like I'll get them done, and then finally I can do the real job of coaching debate and getting the strategy work done. That there is more of a balance that needs to be struck there. Like it is part of your job to do these other things, and so treating them as an obstacle or as this is all the annoying stuff that I will eventually get done and then do the real work of what I want to do, like you've got to make a little bit more space in your story or your kind of narrative of how you work to incorporate some of those tasks as they are a part of the real job. If you are accustomed more to thinking of it as, you know, my job is talking to a debater about XYZ strategy. Identifying some helpers for those new tasks. You know, like we had a really good budget person, and you know, I understood in interacting with that person very, very early, like this is the person who I'm going to be talking to about a bunch of stuff that like in theory is like related to the budget. It involves some other tasks as well. And like, ooh, The HR component, not so great. So like, I'm going to need to find some workaround, kind of identifying parts of the process in your university that are operating reasonably smoothly versus those that don't. There's a lot of like personnel is policy in many university environments. And so kind of like figuring out early on, what are some of the processes that are going to be smooth versus those that may be very difficult, so that you can plan around and anticipate some of those things. Because if the person isn't changing that job, chances are that the speed of the procedure won't be changing very much either, right? Especially for stuff for like NDT eligibility forms and documentation, and just like some of those things that probably you have not done before, like figuring out whether or not the university does them effectively, or like whether or not there is a channel that's going to work better or not, is worth some time and attention. Goals and program success, and kind of like explaining your program to the administration. I think the most important thing here is that there are, as everybody who has spoken up to this point has illustrated, you're coming into probably a bunch of different possible environments, and figuring out the degree to which, is there a well-established story that you kind of, if you're going to alter, it's going to be over the longer term. And so figure, like, okay, there's some stuff that needs to stay the same in the way that we tell the story of our program. It might be that you're coming into, like, oh, this is a program that is rebuilding or hasn't had a lot of administrative contact. And so a new hire or a new position is like a way that that story gets told for the first time. If so, thinking about that and being careful to do it in a way that doesn't trap you down the road is an important thing to think about. It's like, do I want to be telling this story about the program for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years? What are some reasonable, goals that we can set, so that, like, I think for a lot of people who are doing this job, you're interacting with parts of the university where probably your first task is explaining what your job is. Or at least understanding what somebody else thinks your job is, and then figuring out whether or not you agree. And if not, what some of the places where you could find agreement, what those might be. So, like the Jackie's novice story was indicative. Those could also be different audiences, right? So like, I think, the development piece, that's an audience piece too. Explaining your program to the alumni probably involves some degree of like relation to their experience. The parts of that will overlap and be in common versus those that won't, may depend a lot on era. And, it's just like communicating to those different audiences, thinking a little bit about that is important. And, just the strategies there, you want some consistency. So that's the other thing, is like, you may have limited times where you're interacting with a few people who are, above you. Using those times to kind of develop some consistency about both what your program is and what you might need for future changes. So, like I have been talking about developing another permanent, a full-time position at Dartmouth for the past like 6 or 7 years. And it might happen now, but it's only because in some ways that's been the thing that's like, the people who are going to be making that decision, they've known about that now for a while, and they've kind of heard the story enough to understand and get some of the, what it is that we're trying to get with that position. Many of the things that are longer term like that for the sustainability or growth of your program are things that you want to be thinking about early on, because it will take, probably those stories will take a while to circulate and have some pull or effect with administrators. The last kind of recruiting piece, I think, is just identifying a pool that makes sense with the student body that attends your school. So, like understanding that if you talk, hopefully there are conduits for people to talk with admissions. There are some good stories to tell about debate right now with regards to admissions. Like there are a lot of different kind of high school student pools that you can be drawing from, finding out the parts of that admissions might be excited to hear about, help you out with, like just whatever kind of lever or wedge gets you in there in that set of conversations is pretty important. Ideally, that will be at least partially a dialogue where they can start to explain to you whether or how some of the people who you had hoped would get in, could get money, like financial, just that's kind of a set of institutional conversations that you probably need to start putting yourself, if you're talking to either somebody in an academic department or in a student life context, it's like, hey, how can I begin to have a conversation with admissions? Who might I talk to? Those are some things that early contacts, once again, are important because it might take a little while for that stuff to pan out. And so kind of positioning yourself to be speaking with the other people who are in positions of decision-making authority on all that stuff can be helpful.
Thank you so much, John. I think that recruiting message is on point. I found that, and I don't know if you all agree, this year, a lot of my conversations with departments has been going to them and just telling them my issue. Like, I was like, I need help recruiting, or like, I need information so we can start to recruit, and like explaining why recruiting debaters was important. And they have like, at a lot of universities, specific like sections of their admissions department is like people who are meant to give you some sort of tool to start that process. I know my story is probably a little unique in that admissions gave me an Excel doc with every single incoming freshman's information, which apparently was like the holy grail of recruiting, which I did not know until after I told people I got that Excel doc, and our department was like, can you give that to us actually? But I've found, and maybe you all would disagree, going to them and telling them your ignorance, which at first made me feel bad, like I'm not doing my job right, but they actually were super excited. They're like, someone's coming in to actually have us help them do our jobs. So I don't know. All right. Thank you all so much for your initial talk. It looks like we've got Michael here. If you have any questions, I'm going to throw it your way, Michael.
Why would you do that, Jackie? No, I'm just
I've
kidding.
already been cold calling. You see this.
Okay, I did have a few questions. I guess my first question, or the biggest one that I think I want to ask, because all of you hampered on alumni relationships being something that's super important. I totally agree with these. And I think that it's less about being difficult to find the alums, but I guess I'm more so curious about what particular programs or events have you all held that involved alumni besides or outside of like banquets and things of that sort?
I could speak to that just because we recently did a pretty large alumni reunion back during the Jesuit on Saturday night during our tournament in October. I haven't ever been as good as I would like to be at putting together alumni reunions, but I have found that anytime we do it, it's just such a huge success. They love coming together. They haven't seen each other in a long time. And so I guess we did one at the 2005 NDT. We did another one, I think, in 2011. And then we just had a break where I really slacked and we didn't really get one going until 2020. And then that got derailed for obvious reasons. So we did this one in 2022. We're planning to host the NDT in 2025, and we're going to do one then. And, I think one of the reasons that they just seem to be so successful and alumni really try to get out for them is because it's, as college debaters, one of the most, and I hear this from alumni all the time, one of the most defining experience, most formative experience of their lives was their involvement in college debate. It impacted them, professionally without a doubt, but also personally as well. And it's just a theme that seems to run through all the discussions they have. Just how influential their experience was. And so these are rare opportunities when they find themselves in a room with a lot of people who shared the exact same experience they did, and not just the experience of college debate, but the experience of being a college debater at Gonzaga. And so, we had, for this last reunion, I think we had 5 generations represented, which was fantastic, or I guess 5 decades rather of debaters represented, which, I was really happy about. And I try to stay in my own lane. And so I don't start hitting them up for money or anything like that. But those are the moments that really remind them why it's so important that they help provide the opportunities to future generations of debaters, right? Because they're now in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They've established their careers. They're looking back on their lives, and they understand, because it's hard to put in perspective when you're in your 20s, just how important your involvement in debate was to who you ultimately become. And they have that perspective now, and they kind of look back on it, and it just makes them want to ensure that that same experience is offered to students that come along after them. So in answer to your question, I know that's a really long way of answering your question, I guess, but these reunions I've found have been the single most impactful way that we can bring them together and remind them of where they come from, and they can remind us of why we do what we do. So I suspect others kind of share that experience.
Well,
Yeah.
can I ask a follow-up to that? I'm sorry first.
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
curious. I'm curious then, insofar as like how does the programming work? Because it seems like you kind of invite like all alumni, right? I guess you just send out like just a big message to people, whether they graduated in like 2019 versus if they graduated 2009, right? If that's the case, I'm curious how the program looks and like those interactions operate, and then also how that might look differently for people who live like in California now versus people who live in the particular area where you were. Like, how do you fund those people coming, or kind of influence or incentivize them to come?
You know, that's a good question. And we've really never, I mean, we certainly, send out a lot of mass communications. Hey, we're going to do this alumni spread, event, spread the word, that kind of stuff. And I'll be the first to admit that this is something, one of the reasons I said alumni issues are so important, because I think when I was a young debater, I didn't do enough of the kind of gathering all of that information and reaching out and staying connected. And I think with time, I realized how important that was, and I got a little bit better at it. So there's certainly still gaps in our a lot, and there's debaters that I coached that I've lost touch with, that I don't know how to get in touch with. I'm still trying to locate, current emails for. That said, we tend to always make these reunions kind of across generations, so we're not really targeting a particular group of alumni. So anyone that we have contact information for, we reach out and invite them. In terms of kind of incentivizing, I think the ones who have, kind of speaking, I don't think it needs a lot of incentive, to be honest with you. Kind of what I was saying a moment ago. A lot of these folks are just excited at the prospect of getting to reconnect on this, this singularity that occurred in their life, and they want to do everything they can to be there. And I don't really have to incentivize it. I haven't ever had an alumni who's kind of said, "Hey, I'm not sure if I can be there because of financial issues, so I haven't been in the position of needing to think about how I would fund people getting there." They've all kind of gotten here, the ones who attend. That said, when I know someone might be like a recent graduate and they're in graduate school and struggling or something like that, I'll always make an offer. If hey, if you can make it out, or if you can free up time, I'll buy you a ticket, or I'll put you up in the hotel, or whatever the case might be. So if I know someone kind of is in that, having been a struggling grad student at one time as well, I feel the pain. So I try to proactively reach out to those folk, but I don't really have a program in place to address that particular need. I don't know if I answered everything you had in there, Michael, but I hope so.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me chime in for a second. So yeah, I want to echo most of what Glenn said. We've tried to do the like the large scale reunions at Michigan, and I think we did one many years ago, but we've kind of find it tough just because finding a time that everyone can make it. So many alums have, a real busy work schedule and young children. So we haven't had that much success at the just like one large one, but I would recommend, if you do kind of try that, try to schedule it obviously around a big event. NDTs, that seems to be something recently for those schools that are hosting it. That's a great opportunity. I think there's going to be some, programming with that at this year's NDT. And I know there was at Iowa, so that's definitely a great idea. But I think sporting events, if there's a big game or rivalry that happens to be in town, trying to schedule an event around that. So, you would hope that people kind of want to just come in just for debate, but they also, if they can come in for debate reunion and to see a big game or do something else that's kind of occurring on the campus at that same time, I think it'd make it even more likely. But one success we've had is kind of doing a little bit more localized reunions and get-ups. So we kind of find that a lot of our alums are located in, some pretty concentrated areas. And so Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York are probably some of the biggest ones, and to a smaller extent, like Los Angeles and Atlanta. But so anytime kind of, we're there for a college tournament, or I'm there for a high school tournament recruiting, we'll kind of send, emails to all those people that are geographically in that same area and say, hey, do you want to get together for a happy hour or something kind of like that? And like when we were at the Georgetown tournament in January, we had an alum in the area kind of host a very small thing for any, both for the team and any alums that happen to be there. And we're doing something similar the Wednesday before the NDT for all debate alums kind of in the Maryland, Virginia, DC area that can attend. And so those like kind of little regional things, you don't have to get everybody, but if you notice that there are clusters in little different areas, I think those are great ways to kind of to get them. But anytime you're at a college, a high school tournament, kind of contact your alums that you first you have to know where they're located, but contact them that have some kind of geographic connection, offer to host an event, either get together with them on a one-on-one basis, even if it's just kind of one or two. I think they really appreciate the effort. And as Glenn said, when they're alums from different eras, they love that because everyone's really interested in what was debate like in these different eras, and the kind of the war stories and the different kind of just talking a shop about how debate was during those times, who were their teammates, kind of what it was like, what the coach was. Those are all kind of great things to do. And then finally, just with travel, sometimes if you can, make a point to, when traveling to tournaments, to visit with alums, that's something I think that's real helpful. We usually drive to the Wake Forest tournament. This year on our drive home, we stopped in Columbus, which was right on the way back to Ann Arbor, and just so the team could have coffee with an alum back from the 1960s. And it was a great exchange, kind of said how they the difference in how arguments were structured and affirmatives and things like that. And I thought the debaters and coaches really enjoyed kind of seeing how debate has changed, both generally and at Michigan in the last time. So even things like that, when kind of driving, and it even may not be the tournament destination, but kind of on your way, if you're stopping somewhere, just allowing the alums to know that you're in the vicinity. And even if they can't make it, just kind of the effort, I think, is something they really appreciate. But a lot of times it does come into fruition.
They really want to know about paperless debate. That seems to be the top of their list. They cannot wrap their mind around how we do this at all. Common question.
I love all those thoughts. I know like last year when we were planning for Warren's retirement party that we hosted at CEDA, something the development office told us that we should be doing, which we had never been doing in the past, was sending like monthly digest reports to the like alums. So like that listserv that I know AK mentioned that they have with alums, we created one. And it was like the digest of how the team was doing. And then at the bottom, every single one was a reminder that Warren was retiring and that there was a reunion for his like retirement party. And it led to a lot of people I didn't know coming to that, that were not on any of the like trophies that we have in the debate office. They were like, oh yeah, we were a novice in 1984 and we quit after that, but I liked your digest reports and we miss Warren. So I think that was something that really helped me at least. And now they kind of, a few of those alums just decided that they are my executive board now, because of all of that communication. And that's been super helpful. So
Jackie, that's actually really perfect. Do you think that like possibly you could send a copy of how your digest looks to those when you send those out to alums?
Honestly, if you want to go on our website, like georgemasondebate.com, on the, like, if you see the tournament results, we have these little blurbs. I just copy and paste every tournament that happened from that month. And I just post like, hello, here's us again. Here's how we did. And it's like, that's all. Like, and they've loved it. And they also have demanded that I post more on Facebook, which is like the bane of my existence, but they follow every single message. Honestly, like something that I've been thinking about, I don't know, like you all will probably have thoughts about this. Like I almost want to farm that out to a debater, because it's a lot, posting just like every single tournament updates, but right now it's me doing it.
Kind of speaking just really quick to that, because it's something I thought of earlier. For new directors, if you're looking for, kind of ways to get debaters paid and also have some of these tasks taken care of, look into whether federal work study positions are extended to your team.
That's
and if they're not, find out why not, and get some of those, because it's just a fantastic way to have an extra, bunch of people being able to do things. Like I've got one work study student on our team who just manages our social media business.
Oh my God, that would be a blast.
I don't want to do any of that. I don't know the time or the abilities to do it. Something like that. I've had, students be really helpful in a lot of the events we plan, whether it's our tournaments or just things beyond what they would normally do as a debater on the team. So anyways, it's a great way to get debaters some extra income without them needing to take a job in the library or the dining facility or something like that if they qualify for work study. So something to look into.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions, Michael? Sorry, I'm like calling on you, but you are the only other new director besides me in this call. So
No, all this were great things. So thank you all very much.
awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. You'll probably get a follow-up email from me at some point. It won't be extensive, but just asking what your biggest failure was and what your biggest success was, because I'm probably gonna create a almost like onboarding document for new directors that's just like, here's what you should do in September, here's what you should do in October, like all of that stuff.
There is the NDT, there's like a subcommittee on new director stuff.
Yeah.
That's also producing some documentation on this. So
Perfect. So I'll probably loop into what they're doing, see if there's anything that still needs to be done. I think that sounds perfect. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. I hope any of this was helpful for people watching it now or watching it later.